Congress headed today toward votes on a long-sought agreement to prevent a national default. It called for reducing deficits and raising the national debt ceiling by more than $2 trillion over 10 years. The final acts in the long-running debt and deficit drama played out this afternoon, first in the House.
The change in direction is historic. We're going from seeing how much money we can spend to how much can we cut.
This bill to me is a pig in a poke, and I'm not willing to buy a pig in a poke.
Leaders on both sides had spent the day lining up support. Vice President Biden traveled to the Capitol to explain the agreement to wary Democrats.
They expressed all their frustration, which I'd be frustrated by sitting there as well, that we were taken down to the wire like this. And so what they want to know is they ask questions specifically about the proposed legislation. The proposed legislation. I thought it was a good meeting, and I feel confident that this will pass.
And House Republicans held a similar session behind closed doors. Majority Leader Eric Cantor spoke afterward.
Now, I said the bill is not perfect, and it's not. But changing the way that Washington spends taxpayer dollars is often a lot like redirecting or turning an aircraft carrier. It's a monumental task.
The 10-year agreement would unfold in two stages. The first would cut spending at federal agencies by about $900 billion. The debt ceiling would be raised immediately by a similar amount, allowing the government to continue borrowing into 2012. In Stage 2, a joint congressional committee would recommend $1.5 trillion in additional savings to be enacted by year's end. Otherwise, automatic spending cuts of $1.2 trillion would kick in, taken equally from domestic and defense programs. Medicaid and Social Security would be exempted, but payments to Medicare providers could be affected. Either way, the debt ceiling would be increased again by at least $1.2 trillion, also by year's end. It could be blocked, but only by a two-thirds vote of Congress. After some uncertainty over which chamber would act first, the House took the lead. The measure drew support from Republicans and Democrats.
If this were the only step ever in dealing with the debt, I would vote no. But it's not. It's only the beginning. We didn't get in this mess with one bill or one piece of legislation. It took a long time and a lot of votes, and it's going to take a long time and a lot of battles to get out of it, and this is a good first step.
There's plenty for members of both parties to find objectionable, and they might be right. But the choice before us is not that between this proposal and some platonic ideal. It is between this proposal and catastrophic default tomorrow.
The Senate's top Democrat, Majority Leader Harry Reid, pressed his chamber to line up behind the bill as well.
Listen, I'm a long-time member of Congress, and I never count my votes until they're cast. So I'm hopeful, but, we'll have to see. The Republicans are going to have to produce some votes, and we're going to have to produce some votes, but I'm not here to declare victory. We have to get this thing passed.
The deadline to stave off a federal default is midnight tomorrow night.
Now we get three views about the deal at hand and the debate surrounding it. First, the president's defense of it, as seen by Jack Lew, the director of the Office of Management and Budget. I spoke with him a short time ago. Jack Lew, the president's budget director, thank you very much for talking with us.
Good to be with you, Judy.
On this debt deal moving its way through the Congress, let's start with what the conservative Republicans are saying. They are saying that this is nowhere near enough to tackle the $14+ trillion debt that this country faces, that it's just basically a drop in the bucket.
Well, I think it's clear. The president made clear last night that he wanted to do more. He wanted to have an agreement that would have had the kind of long-term structural changes in both tax policy and in entitlement policy to really address the problem for the next 10, 15, 20 years. What we have is not quite that, but it's substantially more than a drop in the bucket. It's very, very tough restrictions on spending on both defense and non-defense over the next 10 years. And it sets up a process where Congress will form a special joint committee that will have the power to make decisions quickly and to move through Congress on an expedited basis. Another very substantial deficit reduction package. So at the front end, there's almost $1 trillion. And the second stage is directed to be $1.5 trillion. So $2.5 trillion is a substantial step. Now, in back of the process, they've put in place an enforcement mechanism so that if Congress fails to act, there will be automatic spending cuts put in place on 50% on defense, 50% on non-defense. So that's a pretty strong incentive for the committee to act.
Well, meanwhile, the Republican leadership is crowing about what they got. The House Speaker, John Boehner, saying he feels very good about it, saying it's very unlikely there would be any tax increases, which is something the president had said he wanted. The Senate, or rather the House Majority Leader Eric Cantor says there's no way the House would support tax increases. So are tax increases off the table?
Quite the contrary, Judy. In every conversation that we've had, whether it's been the president and the leaders or the negotiations with the vice president, or as our economic team engaged with the Congress, every step of the way we've been clear, a long-term solution requires that everything be on the table. There will not be that kind of consensus behind long-term entitlement reform unless you also have a commitment to long-term tax reform, so that we don't have a system where you're asking senior citizens and students to pay the full price, and you're letting people who are at the highest income levels not be part of the solution.
So Jack Lew, if something comes out of this super committee later this year that doesn't include tax increases, the president will veto it?
I think that what's clear is there will be 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans from the House and the Senate, so a total of 12 members of Congress, evenly divided, charged with looking at this with the understanding that they need to bring something back that can pass the House and the Senate and be signed into law. There are a lot of different paths they could take. I'm describing what it would take to get the kind of long-term structural changes done. That would require balance. This package has a piece of what is a big solution. It has the piece that affects the annual spending on defense and non-defense programs. The next step is harder, and it will require balance. And
at this point, are you able to say the president would veto something without tax increases?
I don't want to speculate on the work of the committee before the Congress even passes the bill, but I think I've made clear what would be required for a balanced package to be put together.
Well, let me move now to the criticism from the left, which I know you're hearing, just as fierce. They're saying the president and the Democrats just gave up and let the Republicans, frankly, get most of what they wanted.
Well, this has been a tough negotiation, but we should start with kind of first principles. The president said very clearly that we need to address deficit reduction while we need to increase the debt limit. These issues should never have been connected the way they were, so that there was a threat of default facing the country. But the president believes deeply that we need to do serious things to reduce spending and to reduce the deficit, and he thinks that taxes should be part of a whole solution. I think the notion that this is the whole solution it's not. It's the first step. It's a down payment. The discretionary spending levels that were provided for in this legislation are tough, but they are belt-tightening. They would require choices to be made, but they don't devastate programs the way the levels that passed the Republican House would. It's a huge difference.
Well, if that's the case, why are progressive groups, and I just read some quotes from a couple of them a moment ago, saying, quote, this is an attack on middle-class families. It asks nothing of the rich. It will reduce jobs in the middle class, and it lines up Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid for cuts.
So let me address those maybe in order. There's nothing in this legislation that singles out middle-class families. In fact, you look at something like education, we've built in a protection for education funding so that the need to fund Pell Grants won't be competing against other things the way it otherwise would. We've built in a firewall so that defense and non-defense levels are clearly set. It is belt-tightening. It is a tough thing to take a freeze and then go a little bit lower. But it's almost $30 billion more room than is in the Republican budget, and that will give us the ability to write bills that we'll have a fight with Congress on priorities, but there's what to argue over because we've agreed on spending levels. We're now arguing about priorities. You asked the question about revenues. We believe strongly that revenues should be part of the whole solution. This is the first step. It is not the whole solution.
And the point, Jack Lew, that the White House ended up fighting this battle on Republican turf, even though Democrats control the White House and the Senate, that it ended up really being fought on the House Republican turf.
Look, there's no doubt that the willingness to threaten the default of the United States, undermining the full faith and credit, and probably sending our economy into a tailspin was something that was a meaningful risk. We think it was irresponsible that there are a large number of members of the other party that were willing to do that. Thankfully, the responsible leaders on the other side understood that was not a place to go, and we were able to negotiate a compromise.
Finally, another comment from one of your friends, and that's the minority whip in the House of Representatives, Steny Hoyer, a Democrat. He said that the president should have offered the bipartisan Bowles-Simpson budget alternative much sooner. In essence, that time was wasted, and that a lot of this could have been avoided if the president had done that.
I think the president's shown through his engagement over these last months an enormous willingness to both lead and to negotiate. We got very close to an agreement, a bipartisan agreement between the president and the speaker. It's something of a tragedy that while the president was willing to go to the finish line, ultimately the speaker couldn't. I hope that we can get back on the track to talking about the kind of balanced policy where we can have that kind of bipartisan agreement. It would be the right thing to do. It's what the American people are asking us to do.
Jack Lew, the director of the Office of Management and Budget. It's good to see you. Thank you.
Good to be with you, Judy.